Back in the 80s, school was a whole different world. Teachers had full control, dress codes were strict, and punishments, let's just say they weren't exactly gentle. From getting paddled in the principal's office to freely drinking soda in class, here are some school rules from the 80s that have completely disappeared. Corporal punishment was totally normal. If you acted out in class during the 80s, you didn't just get a warning, you felt the consequences. Many schools allowed teachers and principals to use paddles, rulers, and even belts to discipline students. The paddle itself was often displayed like a trophy behind the principal's desk, a constant reminder to behave. Some even had holes drilled into them for extra speed and sting. A trip to the principal's office wasn't just about a stern talk. It could mean 3 swift swats with a wooden paddle while the secretary pretended not to hear. Parents rarely objected, and in many cases, if you got in trouble at school, you were in for another round when you got home. Today, corporal punishment is banned in most schools, but back then, it was seen as just part of growing up. Did you or anyone you knew ever get the paddle? And do you think schools were stricter because of it? Kids could walk home alone, no questions asked. In the 80s, there was no such thing as parent pickup lines outside the school. If you lived nearby, you just walked home. No permission slips, no supervised handoffs, just a simple see you tomorrow as you headed out. Latchkey kids were everywhere, and it wasn't unusual for children as young as 6 or 7 to walk home alone or even take public transportation. Safety wasn't a top concern. Parents just expected you to use common sense. Fast forward to today, and schools require parents to sign kids out, provide identification, and in some places, students can't leave unless an authorized adult is physically present. It's a huge shift from the carefree independence of the 80s. Did you walk home from school alone? Or did you and your friends make an adventure out of it, stopping at the local store for candy on the way? You could actually fail a grade, no participation trophies. In the 80s, if you didn't do the work, you failed. Plain and simple. There was no automatic grade promotion, no extra credit for effort, and definitely no participation awards. If you didn't pass your classes, you repeated the grade. Teachers were brutally honest about performance. Report cards weren't padded with nice effort comments. If you were struggling, teachers would call you out in front of the class or send you to summer school. Parents weren't going to fight your case either. They expected you to study harder next time. Today, many schools emphasize social promotion, where kids are moved up regardless of performance to keep them with their peers. Do you think failing a grade in the 80s made students tougher, or was it just unnecessary stress? The principal had full authority, and you feared them. Principals in the 80s weren't friendly. They weren't standing at the door greeting students with high fives. They were intimidating, and everyone knew it. If you got sent to the principal's office, it wasn't just for a chat, it meant serious trouble. Some principals were known for yelling, and some even smoked in their offices. Their authority wasn't questioned, and if you got in trouble, you couldn't just have your parents come and argue on your behalf. Most of the time, your parents sided with the principal. Nowadays, principals are expected to be approachable, focusing on student mental health and conflict resolution rather than strict discipline. It's a completely different dynamic. Did you ever get the look from your principal that made you straighten up immediately? The dress code was strict, and girls had it worse. Today's school dress codes might seem strict, but in the 80s, they were even tougher, especially for girls. Skirts had to be a certain length, spaghetti straps were unheard of, and in some schools, girls weren't even allowed to wear pants. For boys, long hair could get you sent home, and ripped jeans? Forget it. Schools enforced these rules heavily, and detentions for dress code violations were common. Now, dress codes have relaxed significantly, and most schools have had to reevaluate policies for being outdated or even sexist. But back then, there was no room for debate. If you broke the dress code, you were either sent home or forced to wear something from the lost and found bin. Did your school have a dress code rule that seemed ridiculous even back then? Soda machines and junk food were everywhere. Back in the 80s, schools didn't care about healthy eating. There were actual soda machines in the hallways, and kids could buy a Coke right before math class. Vending machines were stocked with chips, candy bars, and Hostess snacks, because who needed nutrition when you had sugar and caffeine? Lunch menus weren't any better. Square pizzas, mystery meat burgers, and tater tots ruled the cafeteria. And let's not forget, chocolate milk was encouraged. Fast forward to today, and most schools have banned soda, swapped candy for granola bars, and served nutritionally balanced meals. Kids now get fruit cups instead of pudding, and soda machines have been replaced with water dispensers. Do you miss the days of grabbing a Twinkie and a can of Mountain Dew between classes? Playing dodgeball meant actually getting hit. Dodgeball in the 80s wasn't the soft foam ball version you see today. It was a full-on battle with rubber balls that could leave welts. And if you were bad at dodging, you felt it. Kids had no helmets, no protective padding, just raw survival instincts. If you got hit in the face, too bad. There was no safe zone or gentle throws. It was a free-for-all, and gym teachers encouraged the chaos. Today, dodgeball has been banned in many schools, or at least modified to be non-aggressive. But back then, getting pelted was just part of gym class. Did you have a dodgeball champion in your class who showed no mercy? Or were you the kid who tried to hide behind the others? No one questioned the no left-handers rule. Believe it or not, in many schools during the 80s, left-handed students were still being forced to write with their right hands. Some teachers genuinely believed writing with the left hand was improper, messy, or even a sign of bad habits. If a lefty was caught using their wrong hand, some teachers would smack their knuckles with a ruler, or make them rewrite entire assignments using their right hand. Parents rarely objected. Many of them had gone through the same thing when they were kids. Today, the idea of forcing a child to switch their dominant hand is unthinkable, but in the 80s, it was just another strange school rule no one challenged. Were you a lefty forced to switch? Or did you know someone who struggled through this outdated rule? You could bring peanut butter to school, and no one had allergies. In the 80s, peanut butter was everywhere in schools. Kids brought peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in their lunchboxes, teachers passed out peanut butter crackers as rewards, and some cafeterias even sold peanut butter snacks. There were no nut-free zones, no allergy warnings, and definitely no peanut bans. If a kid had an allergy, well, the school didn't really accommodate them, they just had to avoid peanut butter on their own. Fast forward to today, and peanuts are practically contraband in most schools. Nut allergies are taken seriously, with strict policies banning peanut products from classrooms. But back in the 80s, no one thought twice about sharing a peanut butter and jelly with a friend. Did your school have peanut butter snacks? Or do you remember a time when no one worried about food allergies? Report cards were mailed, and there was no hiding them. Unlike today, where students and parents can check grades online in real time, report cards in the 80s were a mystery until the envelope arrived in the mail. There was no grade tracking or instant updates. If you flunked a test, you wouldn't know until report card day. And once that envelope arrived at home, there was no deleting emails or accidentally forgetting to show it to your parents. It went straight to mom and dad, often leading to some tense dinner table discussions. Today, students can see their grades instantly, making report cards far less suspenseful. But back then, that sealed envelope could either be relief or total doom. Do you remember the fear of waiting for report cards? And did you ever try to beat your parents to the mailbox? The cafeteria had zero nutrition rules. If you went to school in the 80s, chances are your cafeteria lunches weren't exactly healthy. Kids were served greasy rectangle pizza, tater tots, burgers with bright yellow cheese, and mystery meat with gravy. And let's not forget the dessert bar, where pudding cups, chocolate chip cookies, and sugary fruit cocktails were a staple. There were no calorie limits, no vegetable requirements, and no bans on soda. If you wanted to eat 2 slices of pizza and wash it down with a can of Sprite, no one stopped you. Today's school lunches are packed with nutritional guidelines, but back in the 80s, junk food ruled the cafeteria. What was your go-to school lunch? And did you ever question what was actually in the mystery meat before eating it? Passing notes. Was the texting of the 80s. Before cell phones, kids had only one way to pass secret messages: folded up notes. Passing notes in class was a serious skill. You had to be sneaky, avoid the teacher's gaze, and make sure it didn't land in the wrong hands. The notes were usually elaborately folded, sometimes in the shape of triangles or squares with flaps. And if a teacher caught you, it was either read out loud to the class, total humiliation, or thrown in the trash, devastation. Today, kids just text under their desks or send messages on social media. But in the 80s, the art of note passing was an essential school survival skill. Do you remember getting a note passed to you? And was it ever intercepted by the teacher? Gym class meant running laps, a lot of them. PE class in the 80s wasn't just about playing fun games, it was about running. If you acted up, if you were late, or if the coach was in a bad mood, you ran laps. Dodgeball, rope climbing, and relay races were all part of the mix, but running was mandatory in most gym classes. And let's not forget the legendary presidential fitness test, where kids had to do pull-ups, sit-ups, push-ups, and run a mile while their classmates watched. Today, gym class is much less intense, with more focus on inclusivity and fun. But back then, if you weren't exhausted by the end of PE, you weren't doing it right. Did you ever have to run extra laps because your class was talking too much? Chewing gum in class was a crime. Teachers in the 80s hated chewing gum. If you got caught, you weren't just asked to spit it out. You might have to scrape gum off the bottom of desks as punishment. Some teachers even did mouth checks to make sure kids weren't secretly chewing. And if someone stuck gum under their desk, that was a crime worse than cheating on a test. Today, gum rules are much more relaxed. But in the 80s, getting caught chewing gum felt like getting caught stealing the teacher's car. Did you ever have a teacher make you scrape gum as punishment? Kids were actually allowed to play outside, unsupervised. Recess in the 80s was pure freedom. Kids ran wild on metal jungle gyms, swung as high as they could, and played rough games like Red Rover and King of the Hill. There were no designated safe zones or structured activities, just chaos and fun. Teachers rarely supervised closely, and kids had to settle their own disputes. If you fell off the monkey bars, you brushed it off. If you got hit in the face with a dodgeball, you shook it off. Now, recess has safety rules and strict supervision, but back then, it was the Wild West. Did you ever play on the death trap known as the metal slide in the summer heat? Which of these school rules do you remember? And do you think schools were better or worse back then? Drop a comment below and let's relive those wild school days together.